All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today because today we have just the tremendous privilege of being joined by Dr. Gimel Rogers, who's agreed to talk with us a little bit about forensic psychology. Before she does, some of you may have actually had her as a professor, but Dr. Rogers, would you mind introducing yourself and say just a little bit about what you do and your position?
Absolutely. So hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Gimel Rogers. I'm a licensed and board certified in clinical psychology, but my specialty is forensic psychology with an emphasis in trauma. And so what does all that mean? Well, first, I'm licensed in the state of California and board certification from the American Board of Professional Psychology. That is the highest credential you can get in a certain specialty area. And so my first specialty area is clinical psychology. I also plan to get a specialty in forensic psychology. So if you're planning to go this route, when I talk more about forensic psychology, put that on your to-do list, American Board of Professional Psychology. So what I do as a forensic psychologist, I have my own private practice. I also work part-time as a custody evaluator. So when you look at the role of forensic psychology, to simplify it, it is the intersection between law and psychology. And so what that means, there's criminal cases and there's civil cases. Under the civil cases, you'll have personal injury as well as any family law matters. And family law matters also are custody related matters, as well as parenting evaluations, etc. Criminal, we kind of understand whether it's murder cases, mitigation cases, trauma related cases, etc. And so, yes, it's very fascinating. Also, what a lot of people don't know as a forensic psychologist, you can do threat assessments. And so threat assessments, you may be hired as a part of a university or a business to consult on their cases to say, hey, we need to let this person go. What is their threat potential given their profile? Forensic psychologists can also work with the U.S. Marshals as well as the FBI and the CIA. So it depends on what type of job you want, if you want to be private practice or government. But either way, it's just the intersection between law and psychology.
Wonderful. Well, for you, so you said you do private practice as at least a part of it. Would you mind telling us just like on a typical day or typical caseload for you, what are a few things that you might do in your day-to-day work?
Yes. So Mondays are typically my clinical days. So I do carry a small caseload. And like I tell all of my students, it is important, even as a forensic psychologist, to maintain a small caseload because you see the DSM come to life. And when you see that on a day-to-day basis working with clients, then when you're interviewing, because forensic interviewing is very different than clinical interviewing. When you're interviewing, you're able to kind of go through your mind a checklist of the person's symptoms. You'll also can look at, are they malingering, which means are they being deceptive for a secondary gain to get off their charge? Because as a forensic psychologist, we explain to the court what they did. We do not make excuses for their behavior, but we give rationale, which means they end up getting less time in prison, right? And so that it would be the clinical day. A forensic day, I may go to the jails to conduct an evaluation, and I may have competency to stand trial. So do they understand what's going on in the courtroom, what their charges are? And in California, the second prong is, can they assist their attorney in helping unfold their case? And also I've had insanity cases, so not guilty by reason of insanity at the time of the crime, were they sane or insane? And then another case, civil cases, so like personal injury cases, let's say sexual harassment on a job or in a school institution, and assessing for how did that harassment impact their mental health and what are the damages. And in legal terms, damages equals money. So how much payout will they get because of what was inflicted upon them? And then as well as custody cases, which we know can happen in a divorce proceeding, or the people may not have been married, but they do have a child that they share custody with.
Okay.
And in that, just to kind of give you a high level, a lot of people think like, oh, this is so exciting. This is a quote unquote sexy job. In reality, the television gives you a great view, but reviewing 8 hours of police video footage is way different than watching it on television. And it's a lot of forensic psychology is reviewing records. You have to be very meticulous, detailed oriented. You can't skim through emails. You actually have to read them because you have to read through case files as well. Why is that important? There's been many times that I've received police records and then actually looked at the video footage and there's a discrepancy. And so we want to make sure that we actually do our job thoroughly because these are people's lives that are in our hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And was this something that you knew you always, sort of from day one, setting out as a psychologist, you knew you wanted to do forensic psychology? Or how did you come to become a forensic psychologist? Even maybe the short version of it, but what was that pathway? What did that look like for you?
Honestly, if you've had me before, you know I'm going to say God, because I did not know anything about forensic psychology until my doctorate program. I had a supervisor who was a forensic psychologist and still is a forensic psychologist, and that is how I learned about the difference between correctional psychology and forensic psychology. So one of my practicum sites was at Ventura Youth Correctional Facility. So that is a prison for adolescents up to the age of 25. And so when she was telling me that correctional psychologists, they work in correctional facilities such as jails as well as prisons, and they conduct therapy groups, sometimes evaluations. But forensic psychologists, if they work inside of a facility, it's only at a jail or a mental hospital, and it's the sole purpose for court-related matters. So this is all pre-trial, which means you're looking at the crime to try to help them get a lesser sentence. Sometimes forensic psychologists are used post-trial for if they had a mistrial or misrepresentation, etc. But that is the difference between forensic psychology and correctional psychology. When I found out the difference, I said, oh, I don't want to be in a jail or prison the entire time. I like flexibility. And so that's why I chose the route of forensic psychology.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. And in pursuing that, what you've mentioned board certification, ABPP, what other kinds of credentials or what steps did you have to take in order to become a forensic psychologist?
So the main step would be during your postdoc year, having a postdoctorate. I'm going to use the word practicum site, but it's really your postdoctoral experience in forensic psychology. So I was in Terminal Island, which is a federal prison in San Pedro, and that also considered forensic experience because it's a prison. But I used as my postdoctoral experience to get a forensic internship.
Okay, and when you say postdoctoral, your doctoral experience was in clinical or counseling psychology?
So my doctorate is in clinical psychology, and the way you are able to set yourself apart, it's all about the type of practicum sites that you have in your doctoral experience and if you take forensic psychology course or not, if it's offered. But it's really about the experience that you had. But I believe that experiences start early. And so I had experience during my master's program as a gang prevention counselor. And so that's in that field, I still went to meetings with probation officers as well as school counselors, principals. So knowing how to work on a multidisciplinary team, do you have an understanding of the legal system? Because as a forensic psychologist, you are working with probation officers. You're also working with attorneys.
Okay. Great. So during your doctoral experience, then having practicum experiences that set you apart, looking postdoctorally at a postdoc experience that's required in a legal setting in order to become a forensic psychologist, and then eventually pursuing board certification in either or in both the clinical psych and forensic psychology.
So to be a forensic psychologist, you don't have to be board certified. However, it does look good because you are testifying. And so a lot of times the other party that did not hire you, they're trying to discredit you. So there's something called a voir dire process in the beginning where they go over your credentials. They say, you have your doctorate from this school, you've been licensed for this amount of time, and these are your experiences. And so the first time I testified, which I'm an anomaly, honestly. I was only licensed for 3 months. And the judge said, well, clearly she's qualified. Why? Because I started my clinical experience in undergrad, which is why, now I was going to save this to the end, but I'll say it now. I have developed an internship specifically for undergrads to be exposed to forensic psychology. And it's a 6-month internship and it's research-based because as undergrads, you can't do a lot. Just ethically, you cannot do a lot. But the person does come to the jails with me. They are able to observe when I'm doing evaluations. We talk about the different laws in forensic psychology, and that will set you apart when you're applying to a doctorate program or even a master's program to say, I have heard of these assessments before. I do know what this law means or what competency means. And so just having that experience experience, even clinical experience in a jail setting, even if it's just shadowing, to be able to talk about that in an interview, that will help set you apart.
That sounds like a wonderful experience you set up. And actually, maybe we'll jump to there and then come back to another question. So if students right now, you've worked with our students at Point Loma, the students sitting there think, gosh, this does sound interesting to me. What are some things that you might recommend that they do to set themselves up on that trajectory, or next steps that they might take, even first as undergrads and then thinking about graduate school?
So as undergrads, I would say seek out forensic psychologists and see if they have any training programs. A lot of forensic psychologists, they only have training programs for master level students, because that means you can help them, right? Because as an undergrad, it is more of like, I'm teaching you. But some people have never thought about having somebody shadow them before. So seek out the opportunity, and you might be able to create an opportunity for yourself just by asking and inquiring. If it's not with a forensic psychologist, even a clinical psychologist, there's a lot of clinical psychologists who conduct custody evaluations, because custody is kind of in this gray area where it's more clinical in nature, but because it involves the court system, it falls under the forensic umbrella, to be honest. Because when we look at forensic, we're answering psycho-legal questions. And the question there is not necessarily a psycho-legal question where it's psychology and the law. It's just saying who's the better fit parent for the child or children. In your master's and doctoral level, hospitals as well as jails and prisons, those are typically the type of placements that you want to be at, because from there you're learning a lot about assessments. Forensic psychologists work a lot with assessments. We interview them, we provide assessments, and then the report writing process to integrate what the assessments say, what the actual interview results are, the records, like I talked about earlier, being meticulous, include that. And honestly, every great forensic psychologist uses research to support their findings. So in my summary and conclusion section, I always have at least one research article to support. Yes, this person was exposed to methamphetamine in utero. Methamphetamine actually inhibits the prefrontal cortex in the development of this aspect of the brain. Therefore, right, so it helps not only educate the court, that is the purpose of a forensic psychologist, to educate the court, but also support your findings.
Okay, that's wonderful. And in fact, just tying it in with Point Loma, we have, obviously everyone takes a 2-semester class in research methods, but there's also an optional class in testing and assessment as well that sounds like might be a helpful one to see if they're interested in that.
Yeah.
Well, to that end, and maybe just sort of a last question or two, I'll do it in reverse order. I'll ask you first to think about the parts of your job that that are the most challenging or that you dislike, and then we'll end on the high note of what's the part of your job that you love doing. So let's start with, are there parts that you wish you could do less of, or parts of your job that are the hardest?
Absolutely. So I would say in the clinical realm, writing notes. Every therapist will say that. And so then in the forensic realm, when I have to review medical records, because medical records are usually 5,000 pages of saying the same thing. However, you miss a page, and that's going to be the one page that has the one piece of information that you need. So reviewing records that are redundant and are time consuming, honestly. But that actually goes to the best part of my job, which is putting together like a 5,000 piece puzzle and seeing it come together, right? So I interview the person, I have my assessment results, I have the records, I have the research, and how does all of that come together and actually give you information to say, this is why this person committed that crime. Again, not excusing the behavior, but making reason for the behavior, so then you can present that information to the attorney and hopefully ultimately the judge.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Gimel, for taking this time out of your day. Is there anything else you'd want our students to know in particular? I don't want to cut you off if there's a good idea in there.
Well, I was just going to say that being a forensic psychologist, one, it's not easy. However, if you feel like you're passionate about it and you want to know more information, please feel free to email me. I will give you my email address. I rarely check my Point Loma email address. So if you want a quick response, it's dr and then my first name, GIM as in Mary, EL, the @ the number 7, fire, FIRE, the number 8.com. And I'm sure that Dr. Mueller could also give you my email address as well. And just know that always maintain your ethics, always maintain your moral compass, because there are people in this field that are called hired guns, which means that you pay them a certain amount of money and they will say whatever. And so just be mindful of that while this field can be very lucrative, at the same time, don't lose your morals to money.
Mm. Thank you both for those reminders. And yeah, we will put a link to Dr. Rogers' email address down below this lecture. But thank you so much. This is incredibly insightful. And for students, just so you know, Dr. Rogers is just an incredible resource that you have as students here. If you've taken a class with her, you already know that. But for her to offer that is wonderful. So thank you so much, Dr. Rogers, for offering that as well. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us. And students, if you have questions for Dr. Rogers, you can jot them in the text box below this, and we will either pass them on to her or we can try to field some of those as a class as we talk in our discussion this week. Thanks so much, Dr. Rogers.
Thank you.